Hello? And welcome to another story here on our channel, where real emotions find a voice. I never thought the worst heartbreak of my life would come from a single sentence spoken in my own kitchen. Under my own roof. By the very woman I had welcomed as a daughter. That morning felt ordinary. The kettle was whistling. The sunlight warmed the tile floor. And I was holding my phone, ready to dial my son to ask about the wedding date he had mentioned months ago. I'd been so excited, spending weeks picking out a soft lilac dress with a matching scarf, imagining how it'd look standing proudly beside him. But before I could even press the call button, Emily, my daughter-in-law, walked in and said it with a smile. "I'll never forget. Oh, we got married yesterday. We only invited special people." At first, the words didn't register. They floated past me like fog until they landed with full weight in my chest. I stood frozen, phone still in hand, staring at the woman I had helped raise in every way but blood. For 3 years, I had paid their rent, $600 a month. I had furnished their entire apartment. The couch she was now lounging on, the bed they slept in, the table where they ate. I had filled their fridge when they were jobless and broke, often feeding them before feeding myself. And now, I wasn't considered special enough to attend the most important day of their lives. My son. Jason? I didn't even look at me. He stared at the floor while Emily adjusted the throw pillow I'd crocheted by hand. In that moment, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't family. I was an outsider with a wallet. In my closet upstairs, the carefully chosen wedding outfit still hung with its tag on, untouched. Its pale purple fabric, now a symbol of humiliation. I had even put aside $1,000 in cash as a wedding gift, tucked neatly into a silver envelope, hoping to surprise them. I'd scrubbed the entire house clean, vacuumed every inch, expecting they might stop by to celebrate. I'd called my sister in Portland to share the joy. I'd daydreamed about raising a toast. All of that vanished with 4 casual words. We already got married. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask why would they do this to me after everything I'd done? But no sound came out. Instead, I stood there like a statue while Jason finally mumbled. It was a small thing, just us and a couple of witnesses. But I knew the truth before I even saw it. Because a few hours later, I did see it. The photos. Dozens of them posted all over social media. Emily in a white dress I'd unknowingly paid for. Her parents, standing proudly next to them. Her siblings, raising champagne flutes. A catered reception. Twinkling lights. Flower arrangements. And me nowhere. Not even a mention. Not even a phone call. I saw the ring I helped finance. The honeymoon fund I had unknowingly contributed to. The joy I was excluded from. And just 7 days after that slap in the face, she called me like nothing happened. Her voice was trembling this time, stripped of the smugness. "Monica, the rent's overdue. The landlord says he'll evict us if we don't pay by Friday. You forgot to send the transfer." I stared at the phone, stunned by her audacity. The same woman who had erased me from her wedding was now calling, like nothing had changed. My voice was steady, calmer than I expected, as I said the words that had been boiling in me all week. "Emily, didn't I tell you? I only help special people." The silence on the other end was so thick, I could hear my own heartbeat. Then came her stammer, her feigned innocence. "Monica, what are you saying? You've always said we were special to you. You're like a second mother to me." Lies. Every word. A rehearsed performance. She had used that same syrupy tone to ask for help buying the wedding dress. The same tone when she needed money for their car repair. Or groceries. Or Jason's job interview clothes. And for years, I gave. I gave not because I was forced, but because I thought it would make me matter. I thought my sacrifices would bind us. I thought I was building love. But in that moment, standing alone in my living room, I realized I had only built dependence and that they had never seen me as anything more than a convenience. The rage didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, settling into my bones like winter cold. For years, I had been the silent giver, the background figure, the one who canceled her own dental appointments to pay their utility bills. But now, something had cracked. Something vital. I sat down, phone still in hand, and whispered to myself, I am done. And just like that, the story of my life, my real life began. Not with a celebration, but with a betrayal. Not with a toast, but with a turning point. I thought the worst was over. I had no idea how far they would go. I put the phone down and let the house go quiet so I could hear what my heart was actually saying beneath the static of habit. It told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. And I had trained them to believe I would always pick up the check. Always soften the consequence. Always say yes. I wandered through the rooms I had polished for a celebration that never happened. Pausing at the hall mirror where my lilac scarf hung like a ribbon from a life I wanted but didn't have. And I could almost see the version of me who would have smiled in photos. Who would have carried flowers and wiped happy tears. Who would have felt like a mother and not a provider. She was gone now. And in her place stood a woman humming with a strange, unfamiliar calm. I made tea and scrolled through the wedding photos again. Not to punish myself, but to look with clear eyes at the truth I had kept trying to pretty up. There were catered plates, crystal glasses raised high, a grace, white dress I helped pay for, and a circle of people called special while I stood outside my own family's door. And each image was a tiny, sharp blade trimming away the story I'd told myself about being needed. It hurt, but the pain had edges I could hold. And when I set the phone down, the room felt larger, as if the walls had stepped back to give me space to breathe. Emily texted twice that afternoon. Little bursts of friendliness splashed with urgency. Messages about the landlord, the date, the misunderstanding. And I watched the bubbles appear and vanish while I refused to be tugged into a conversation that only had one destination, my bank account. Evening slid across the floor like a gray shawl, and I turned on the lamp by the couch she had once called perfect. The couch I'd chosen for them, and then bought again for myself when theirs wore out. And I remembered the soft pleasure I felt picking fabrics, choosing the warm beige because it meant family could gotabanet kolagataman at a ball, sit and talk and feel safe. And, right there in that memory was the answer I needed. Safety had to start with me. When the streetlights blinked on, I took the lilac dress from its hanger and laid it on my bed, smoothing the fabric with my palms the way mothers do with their children's hair. And I whispered the truth as gently as I could. This dress is not a failure. It's a reminder. I slid the dress back into the closet and set the silver wedding envelope on the dresser. Still sealed, still hopeful. Still waiting for a day that would now belong to someone else. Sleep came in fits and starts, but it came cleaner than the night before. With fewer loops of what-ifs and more steady statements of here's, what is, and, when morning arrived, I didn't reach for my phone to check if they had apologized. I reached for the kettle and the sugar bowl and the small blue cup I reserve for days when I need courage. Steam lifted. Light softened the edges of the table. And for the first time in a long time I sat down and gave myself my full attention. The first sip carried a decision with it. I would stop pretending that love could be purchased in monthly installments. I pulled a notebook from the drawer, the one with watercolor poppies on the cover, and wrote one bold line across the top. What I have given. The pen hovered, then landed on numbers I knew by heart, even though I'd never dared to total them. Rent at $600 a month for 3 years. Utilities in the winter when the heating bill doubled. Groceries on thin weeks. Tires after the nail in the road. The dress. The rings. The deposits you cannot recover. The little things a mother silently does because she thinks it keeps the family from fraying. The page filled quickly. Ink, marching toward a sum I wasn't ready to read. So I closed the cover and pressed my palm on it like a lid on a boiling pot. I would finish the math later, when I had a stronger spine and a cooler mind. For now, there was a simpler task. Reclaim the switch I had flipped for everyone else and never for myself. The phone began its chime. Jason first. Then Emily's number. Then a new number I didn't recognize, and I let each ring pass through the house and out the back door, disappearing into the maple tree that has listened to me for 20 years without once asking for gas money. At 10 past 10, the messages arrived. Our names softened into pleading. A chain of reasons and corrections and promises that this time would be different. And I learned the discipline of ignoring what argues with my peace. I changed into a navy sweater and the comfortable flats I keep by the door for errands. And I stood a moment with my hand on the knob because I understood the quiet ritual of what I was about to do. A person doesn't become new in one dramatic moment. A person becomes new through a series of ordinary doors. Outside. The air was crisp and clean. And my little street looked the way it always does. Porches with pumpkins. A kid wobbling by on a scooter. The neighbor down the block tugging his Adderall. Reluctant beagle, but none of it felt the same because I was walking through it with my chin level. Not tilted to listen for the next emergency. I took the long route to the bank on purpose. Past the bakery where I bought cupcakes for birthdays they forgot to show up to. Past the park where I used to push Jason in the swing and memorize the sound of his laughter so I could pull it down later when life got hard. And I let those memories sit beside me like kind companions who would not steer the wheel. At the corner I paused to watch a mother kneel to tie her child's shoelace, and the tenderness caught me off guard. I wanted to tell her that loving well sometimes looks like saying no. That kindness without boundaries curdles into pity. That one day she might have to choose between rescuing and respecting. And that respecting herself will always be the choice she can live with. The bank's glass doors reflected a woman I recognized, and didn't the same eyes my sister says are too forgiving. The same hair I keep meaning to trim. But there was a steadiness in the shoulders that felt new. A set to the mouth that said I can do hard things. Inside smelled like paper and printer ink and quiet decisions. And the lobby was half full. The way places get midweek when everyone is tending to the practical parts of staying alive. I stepped forward, took a ticket, and sat in a chair that faced a row of framed photos of smiling people shaking hands over loan approvals. And I thought about all the hands I had shaken with myself in the past 3 years. All the deals I had made in secret to justify one more favor. One more transfer. One more last time. The display flicked through numbers, and I practiced my opening line, the way you practice a prayer, simple. Direct? True. Across the room, a man in a charcoal suit glanced up from his desk and offered a warm nod. He had helped me set up those transfers long ago. Back when helping felt like an investment in a future where I would be held with the same care I had given. I could feel the tremor start in my hands. The tiny animal of old fear pacing beneath my ribs. What if I am being cruel? What if this closes a door I'll need later? What if they finally change, and I am not there to see it, and I answered each what if with the same sentence? I am allowed to protect my life. My number lit on the screen, and I rose, smoothing the front of my sweater as if it were armor. Each step toward the desk felt like a step away from the fragile story I had lived inside and toward a plainer, sturdier truth. When I reached the counter, the clerk smiled and asked how she could help. And I heard my voice before I felt my courage. Calm and steady in the open air, as I said that I needed to make some changes to the automatic transfers on my account, somewhere in my pocket. The phone buzzed again with a familiar rhythm. But I didn't reach for it. I looked past the clerks to the office in the corner, where the manager was just standing to greet a new client. And as his eyes met mine in recognition, I understood that this was the moment the story would tilt for good. Because I wasn't here to argue with anyone about love. I was here to close a valve. The manager began walking toward me, already raising a hand in a friendly hello. And I took a slow breath, feeling the old chapter loosen its grip as I prepared to say the words that would change everything. Mr. Calhoun remembered me right away. His expression shifted from routine politeness to something warmer, more familiar. The way someone might greet an old friend they hadn't seen in a while, but still recognized in full. Mrs. Weston, he said, motioning me toward his office. It's been some time. I smiled, tight but genuine, and followed him through the glass doors into the office where, for the past 3 years, ID signed away small pieces of my future under the illusion of keeping my family close. I sat down across from him and looked at the pen holder on his desk. The same one I remembered from last time, stainless steel. Heavy. Too fancy for what it held. ID liked to cancel the automatic transfers. I said clearly, laying the weight of my decision right on the table like an unopened letter. He raised his eyebrows. Not in judgment, but in curiosity. Are you sure? He asked gently, already pulling up my file. These payments have been very consistent. That was one word for it, consistent. Like a faucet left dripping. Like a promise never questioned. Like a rope tied too tightly around my own neck. I am sure. I replied. ID also liked to update the security settings on all my accounts. No external access. Not even my son. There. I said it. Jason's name hung in the air for a beat. And then Mr. Anna/Kaner. Calhoun nodded. Something in his eyes shifting again this time. To understanding. I can help with that, he said. And his fingers began typing. Each click sounding like a tiny lock snapping shut on a door I should have closed years ago. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Jason. Then Emily. Then Jason again. I didn't look. I turned it off completely and set its screen down on the corner of his desk. You'd be surprised how many people your age come in here with the same request. Mr. Calhoun said softly, not looking up from the screen. It's more common than people think. I met his eyes and held them, realizing in that moment that his concern felt more honest than anything Jason had offered me in months. I am not being forced into this, I said. I am just finally not forcing myself to keep pretending I am okay with it. He paused, then gave a small, respectful nod. Understood. Let's get everything locked down. As he worked, I watched the cursor blink across the screen like a metronome counting down the final seconds of the old me. When the forms were ready, I signed each one with a firm hand. No hesitation. Then I stood, thanked him, and stepped back out into the lobby feeling oddly weightless. It was as though I had walked in with a backpack full of wet stones, and now, somehow, they had been set down and swept away. The sky had shifted slightly. The air felt brighter. Or maybe it was me. Maybe that weight had pressed down so long, I didn't know how tall I could still stand. As I stepped outside, my phone still off, I felt a strange sense of quiet power. Like I had reclaimed something vital and deeply mine. I didn't head straight home. I took a different route, letting my feet decide where to go. For the first time in years, I was walking without an errand, without a purpose, without a to-do list shaped by someone else's crisis. I passed the flower shop on Maple Avenue and paused at the window. There, in the front display, was a bouquet of peonies, pale pink, full, gentle. My mother used to say peonies were flowers that forgave. I stepped inside and bought the bouquet without hesitation. It wasn't for anyone else this time. It was for me. Back home. The stillness felt different. Not hollow, peaceful. My kitchen table, where I had once counted out rent money, now held only the flowers, a cup of coffee, and the quiet hum of a life slowly returning to its rightful owner. I sat and flipped open the notebook again. This time, I forced myself to finish the math. $600 in rent for 36 months, $21. $600. Groceries. At least $300 a month. Conservatively, another $10. $800. Gas money. Birthday gifts. The couch. And the doctor bills I paid out of guilt easily, another $5. 000. To the wedding dress alone had been $900. Tucked into the emergency money Emily had asked for, with trembling hands and downcast eyes. I added it all up. One column after another. My pen scratching in steady defiance of the lies I had let myself believe. The final number. $39. $200. I stared at it. Not with anger, but with clarity. That number wasn't just money. It was evidence, a receipt for years of invisible labor and emotional theft, neatly summarized in black ink. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I was done offering my tears to people who didn't value them. Around 2 in the afternoon, a familiar rumble pulled me out of my thoughts. A car door. Then another. I rose and peeked through the curtain. 3 cars in front of my house. Jason's. Emily's. And a third I didn't recognize. I watched shadows move through the glass. Figures passing back and forth. My heart thumped hard once, but didn't stutter the way it used to. I had already decided who I was now. And she didn't open her door without knowing exactly what she was letting in. They had keys. That part I had forgotten. I had given them copies back when I still believed we were a team. When I still believed someone would show up for me the way I had always shown up for them. The doorknob turned. Footsteps crossed the threshold. I took one deep breath and walked toward the sound. If they wanted a confrontation, they had picked the wrong woman. Because I wasn't their banker anymore. And I wasn't afraid. Jason was sitting on my couch with his head buried in his hands. Elbows on knees like a teenager caught stealing. Emily was pacing behind him like a cat in a cage, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor I had paid to refinish 5 years ago when they first moved in and promised they'd only stay for a little while. And then there was the man. Older. Late 50s perhaps. Gray suit too crisp for comfort. Briefcase on the dining table next to my bank statements and mail, my personal things they had absolutely no right to touch. I stepped fully into the living room. Not angry yet. Just stunned by the sheer audacity of what I was seeing. "What's going on here?" My voice was calm, deliberately so, and that calm startled them more than if I'd shouted. They all looked up as if I were the intruder. As if I was the one who needed to explain herself in her own home. Emily was the first to speak, and her voice came rushing out too quickly. Too brightly. like someone trying to reset the clock. Monica. Thank God you're here. We need to talk. This is Mr. Farnsworth. It has with a family law office. We just were worried about you. Worried about me, I said. My words came out sharp, almost metallic. What exactly is the concern? Jason stood up slowly, his expression rehearsed but shaky. Mom, we went to the bank, and they told us you canceled all the transfers. Mr. 1. Calhoun said you even revoked the shared access. We're just confused. You didn't say anything. And well, we didn't know if maybe you're going through something. I am not going through something. I interrupted. I am waking up from something. Mr. 1. Farnsworth stepped forward then, his voice as smooth as cold butter. Mrs. Weston, I am a family law attorney, and your children have asked me to assist in assessing your situation. Their concern is that recent decisions you've made may reflect a decline in your ability to manage your affairs. I didn't answer. I walked right past him and picked up the documents head spread out on my table. They were mine. Utility bills, pension statements, even my life insurance policy. These are private, I said, folding the papers neatly. You had no right. Mom, Jason began. We're just trying to help. You've been acting different, erratic, even. First, the money. Then ignoring our calls. Now installing cameras and locks. You think that's erratic. I snapped. I call it finally taking care of myself. Emily walked toward me. That same tone she always used when she wanted something curling around her words. We're just worried. Monica. You've always been so generous. So dependable. Maybe the loneliness is getting to you. At your age. These kinds of shifts can happen. At my age. I repeated. I am 71. Not ancient. And the only thing that's shifted is my patience for being treated like an ATM with feelings. Mr. 1. Farnsworth cleared his throat. Ma'am, if I may. We've prepared a few documents that would allow Jason and Emily to assist with your finances, a temporary power of attorney. It's nothing drastic. Just something to help facilitate. No, I said flatly, cutting him off. You don't get to facilitate anything. Not anymore. Monica, Jason said, his voice rising now, frustration bleeding through the cracks. We have bills to pay. Car payments. Rent. Credit cards you helped us co-sign. You can't just cut us off like this. Who says, I can't? I said, louder than I intended. Who says I am obligated to keep supporting two grown adults who lie to me, steal my privacy, and erase me from their lives when it's convenient? Emily's composure cracked then. She started crying, not soft, sorrowful tears, but the angry, sputtering kind that come when manipulation no longer works. You can't do this to us, she hissed. We built our life around your support. We counted on you. Exactly, I said, stepping back. You built your life around me. But you never once built it with me. Mr. Farnsworth picked up a folder and placed it in front of me. Mrs. Weston, I would encourage you to review these documents before dismissing this entirely. Your family is concerned, and they're within their rights to request a court review of your financial capacity. You mean guardianship? I said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. So that's what this is, I said. More to Jason than to anyone else. If you want to have me declared incompetent so you can legally control what's left of my savings." Jason looked away. Emily didn't. She was done pretending. "We have a right," she said coldly. "Everything you have will come to us one day anyway. We're just getting ahead of the inevitable." That, more than anything else, shattered something inside me. Not the betrayal I'd felt that before. It was the certainty in her voice. As if I were already gone. As if I were just a number in their future spreadsheet. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. "All of you." "Mr." Farnsworth didn't argue. He collected his things with the quiet efficiency of someone used to hearing the word no but not used to losing. Jason tried one more time. "Mom, this is going to end badly for you. You're going to end up alone with no one to take care of you." I looked him straight in the eye. And I didn't blink. "I am already alone, Jason. The difference is, now, it's by my choice, not because you forgot I existed." I opened the door wide and didn't say another word. They left slowly, like people pretending they weren't retreating. I locked the door behind them and stood in the hallway, surrounded by a silence, so deep. It rang in my ears, but for the first time in years, I didn't fear that silence. I welcomed it, because it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like freedom. I didn't know yet what they would do next. I only knew they wouldn't stop here. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, because my mind was lit up like a city. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to its steady hum like it was holding time together. Every memory, every moment I had ignored, excused, rationalized. I began to flicker through my mind in sequence like a film reel of warnings I had chosen not to see. In the time, Jason borrowed money to fix the car, but never paid it back. The day Emily cried over a bill that was suddenly due. Just one day, before I was supposed to go on a trip with friends. It's the way they always came around when something broke, but never when something good happened. I had made excuses for them so long. I had memorized them like scripture. They're just young. They're stressed. They'll grow out of it. But they hadn't. And now they had escalated the game. They had shown me what they were really capable of. At sunrise, I got out of bed and dressed with the same determination I'd once reserved for job interviews or doctor's appointments. I made myself a proper breakfast, not toast over the sink like I'd done so many times when rushing to send a wire for them. I sat at the table and wrote out a plan. First, change the locks. Second, install a security system. Third, meet with a real attorney, one who represented me. And fourth, document everything. Every transfer. Every favor. Every receipt. I had kept most of it out of habit. But now it would serve a different purpose. Now it was my defense. By 9 o'clock I was at the locksmith. Mr. Harvey, the owner, raised his eyebrows when I told him I wanted every single lock in the house replaced, doors, windows, even the garage. Something happened. "Miss Weston?" he asked, friendly but cautious. "Yes," I said. I gave keys to people I trusted. Turns out I shouldn't have. He didn't press. He just nodded, wrote the order, and promised installation by that afternoon. While I was there, I asked about security systems. His son, Kevin, ran that part of the business. "He's in the back." "Mr. Harvey said. "Want me to grab him?" I nodded. It felt like the universe was responding. Kevin came out. A tall young man, with kind eyes and sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "Mrs. Weston, he said, tell me what you need, and we'll build it from scratch. By noon, we had mapped out camera placement, access codes, emergency contacts, and remote monitoring. You'll be able to see who's at your door from your phone, Kevin said, showing me the app. And if anything happens, it automatically alerts the police. I nodded. Install it all. He hesitated. Most people your age just go with one camera and maybe a motion light. I looked at him without flinching. I am not most people. He smiled just a little and said nothing more. That afternoon, as the locks were being changed and cables run through the walls, I turned my phone back on to check voicemails. 10 missed calls. 3 from Jason. 4 from Emily. 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't listen to a single message. But one text caught my eye. It was from an unknown number, but the writing was unmistakably Emily's. Please, Monica, just talk to us. We miss you. Can we have dinner together, just us? To make it right. For a moment, my hand trembled. Not from weakness, but from muscle memory. I was so used to saying yes. So used to being the one who bent first. But I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked the number. The silence that followed was instant and holy. By 5 o'clock, everything was installed and functional. Kevin showed me how to use the system, walked me through the app, and then handed me a final document to sign. You're fully protected now, he said. No one comes in unless you say so. I thanked him. And as they packed up their tools, I looked around my home and saw it differently. Not as a target. Not as a convenience. But as a place I could finally claim again. After they left, I took a long shower, letting the water wash over me like a second beginning. I put on my favorite cardigan, the one ID stopped wearing because Jason said it made me look old, and made tea in my grandmother's china, which I usually saved for guests, but I was done saving things for people who didn't care. That evening, I walked next door with a small peace offering. Mrs. Ellison, my neighbor, had left a note last week about loud voices she overheard. I hadn't responded yet. She opened the door with a surprised smile. Monica, she said. I was wondering if everything's okay. I handed her a small box of pastries and smiled. Everything is better than okay. I am just finally taking back my life. She invited me in for a cup of coffee. And for the first time in months, I said yes. We talked for over an hour. She listened. She nodded. And then she said something that took my breath away. You know, she began, my sister went through something similar. Her daughter tried to get her declared unfit just to access her savings. It's more common than you think. I stared at her. She tried to take control of everything, said it was about helping. But it wasn't. It was about money. Control. What did your sister do? I asked. She fought back. Got a lawyer. Documented everything. And she won. The words sat in the air like a lifeline. I left her house that evening with more than a full heart. I left with a direction. I would call a lawyer. A real one. The next day, I would reclaim my legal power the same way I had reclaimed my home. I would build a wall. They couldn't climb, because Jason and Emily weren't done. I could feel it in my bones. They had lost access, but not their ambition. And people like that, they always make another move. The next morning, I was at the office of Miriam Sloan by 8:45 a.m. 20 minutes early for our appointment. I had met Miriam once. Years ago. At a community event for retired professionals. She was sharp, direct, and had the kind of presence that made even confident men sit up straighter. Now in her 60s, with silver hair cut into a no-nonsense bob and glasses that flashed when she made a point. Miriam had spent most of her career protecting older women from financial abuse, and she did not mince words. When she stepped into the waiting area and saw me, she smiled, like someone who had seen too many of us walk through that door. "Monica," she said, extending her hand firmly. "Come in. Let's make sure no one ever tries to take from you again." Her office was filled with legal books and family photos, grandchildren on swings, her daughter at graduation, a dog in a Halloween costume. I noticed them all. But it was the framed quote on her bookshelf that held me longest. "You teach people how to treat you by what you allow." Miriam gestured for me to sit and said, "Start from the beginning." And I did. I told her everything. The secret wedding, the years of rent, and groceries. The couch. The car repairs. The way they used kindness as currency. I told her about the surprise visit with the lawyer. The threats. The manipulation. The way Emily had said, without shame, that everything I had was inevitably theirs. Miriam took notes without interrupting. Occasionally, she nodded or raised an eyebrow. But mostly, she let the silence stretch when it needed to, giving me space to breathe. When I finished, she closed her notebook. "Monica," she said gently, "what you're experiencing is called elder financial abuse. It's not just morally wrong, it's a federal crime." The words landed like a verdict. I had suspected it, deep down. But hearing it said out loud, with legal certainty, made it real. "They've already tried to force power of attorney," she continued. "The next logical step, if they're as desperate as they seem, is to claim mental incompetence and request a guardianship." "Can they really do that?" I asked. "File a lawsuit against their own mother to declare her unfit?" "Yes," Miriam said plainly. "And they will. That's why we're going to prepare now. Not later." For the next 2 hours, we went through my financial records together. Rent transfers, receipts for groceries, payment histories for repairs, Venmo logs, text messages, everything I could find. I laid bare. "You've been their primary income for over 3 years," Miriam said, doing quick math in her head. "That's over $40. 000. And they treated you like a stranger at their wedding." I nodded slowly. "I thought it would buy love. Or loyalty. At the very least, respect." "It never does," she replied. And there was no judgment in her voice, only truth. "Love is free. Or it isn't real." We made a plan. First, she would draft an updated will, one that made it clear my estate was mine to manage, without ambiguity. Second, she would file a legal declaration of mental competence, backed by a licensed psychiatric evaluation. Third, she would contact the bank to add legal safeguards and notify law enforcement about the prior unauthorized entry into my home. "We document everything," she said. "If they file a petition for guardianship, well, bury it in proof they can't refute." When I left her office, the sun was bright and warm on my skin. I felt something in my chest, loosen for the first time in weeks. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was defending. I was building walls from the inside out. Not waiting for another breach to patch up with duct tape and apologies. I stopped by the bakery on the way home, bought a single lemon tart. my favorite, and sat at the park bench near the library where Jason used to play as a boy. It was strange how grief and relief could sit side by side in the same heart. I had loved him. I still did. In a quiet, complicated way. But love wasn't permission. And I would no longer confuse the two. When I got home, the new locks clicked smoothly under my key, and the security system beeped once in recognition. I checked the camera feed clear. No movement. The house was still. Safe. My sanctuary. I made tea, set the lemon tart on a china plate, and sat at the table with my newly signed legal documents in front of me. These papers weren't just forms. They were boundaries made visible. Every signature was a line drawn between what I would allow and what I would never again tolerate. Later that evening, I received a message from an unknown number. Not a call this time. A text. Short? Chilling. We're not giving up. Monica. We have lawyers too. No name. No context. But I knew. And I smiled just a little. Because now, I had lawyers too. And mine weren't trying to take anything. They were here to protect everything I had fought for. I opened the living room window to let the breeze in, sat back in my chair, and closed my eyes. The war had not yet begun. But the battle lines were drawn. And I, for the first time in a long time, was ready. The next morning began like any other tea. A walk around the garden. And my usual scan of the security camera feeds. Nothing unusual. Just a dog passing by. A jogger in a neon jacket. The mailman's truck. But by mid-morning, the peace cracked. It started with the doorbell. Not the usual chime I had grown used to since installing the new system. This one felt heavier. More deliberate. I checked the monitor before moving. An unfamiliar woman stood on the porch, mid-30s, professionally dressed, holding a folder. Her expression was polite but firm, like someone sent on a mission that she knew would be uncomfortable. I didn't open the door immediately. I cracked the window beside it. Yes. She looked up, her voice calm but practiced. Good morning. Ma'am. Are you Monica? Weston. I am. My name is Joanna Clark. I am a social investigator with the Department of Elder Services. We've received a report concerning your well-being and are conducting a wellness check. There it was. I had been waiting for this. Jason and Emily had escalated. I unlocked the door but kept the chain in place and asked to see her badge. She held it up without hesitation. It was real. I opened the door and let her in. But only after reminding myself. You have nothing to hide. And even less to apologize for. Inside. She took a seat at the dining table. Glancing briefly at the framed documents still laid out from my meeting with Miriam. Mrs. Weston, she began. This won't take long. We've received a report from family members expressing concern about recent behavior. They mentioned erratic financial decisions, sudden isolation, and what they described as signs of paranoia, installing excessive security, cutting off communication, and rejecting help. I stared at her. Let me guess, Jason and Emily Weston. She didn't answer directly. I can't confirm sources, but I'd like to ask a few questions. I nodded slowly. ID, like my lawyer present. This isn't a legal proceeding, ma'am. It's just a check-in. I didn't blink. Then I am asking for my lawyer anyway. I called Miriam, who picked up on the first ring. When I told her who was in my home, she said she'd be there in 15 minutes. Say as little as possible until I arrive," she advised. We waited in silence. Joanna looked around politely, noting the clean counters, organized shelves, photos on the wall, me and Jason at his college graduation, me and my late husband on our wedding day, me holding a baby girl I once thought would be my granddaughter. All of it part of a life they thought they could rewrite. Miriam arrived exactly on time. She greeted Joanna with a calm professionalism that bordered on cold. "My client is fully mentally competent," she began. "If this visit is based on reports from individuals with a vested interest in her finances, I would advise caution. False claims to gain control of a person's estate are serious." Joanna shifted slightly in her seat, suddenly less confident. "We're just responding to concerns. Ms. Sloan. We're obligated to investigate all reports." "Good," Miriam said, opening her own folder. "Then let's look at the facts." She laid out documentation of my financial history, recent psychiatric evaluation, bank statements, and my own written testimony of events. Everything was meticulously organized. Every page time-stamped and signed. My client has no cognitive impairments, no memory loss, no diagnosed psychiatric conditions. What she does have is a clear pattern of financial exploitation by family members who are now attempting to claim she's unstable simply because she asserted financial independence. Joanna flipped through the pages slowly. Her eyes moved with growing discomfort. When she finally looked back up at me, her voice had softened. "Mrs. Weston, do you manage your finances on your own?" "I do." "Do you live alone?" "Yes. By choice." "Do you take any medication?" "Just vitamins. Sometimes a baby aspirin." "Have you refused medical care?" "I go to my doctor twice a year." "Nothing has changed." "Have you ever felt unsafe?" I paused. "Only once. When my son and his wife entered my house without permission, brought a lawyer, and tried to convince me I was losing my mind." Joanna's face shifted. Something in her understanding clicked into place. "Have they ever asked you for large amounts of money?" "Repeatedly. I kept records." "Would you feel more comfortable with a restraining order?" Miriam leaned in. "We're already preparing one." Joanna stood. "In that case, I see no indication that Mrs. Evection Cest Weston is at risk or unfit. I'll be closing the file." She glanced at me with something close to shame in her eyes. "I am sorry for the intrusion." After she left, Miriam and I sat for a long time in silence. I looked out the window, watching the wind stir the trees like breath returning to a still room. "They're not going to stop," I said. "No," Miriam agreed. "But neither are we." That evening, I went through my drawers and pulled out all the journals I'd kept over the years. Old receipts, holiday cards with notes asking for loans, texts I had printed out. They all told the same story. A woman who had been slowly drained in the name of family. I stacked them neatly, labeled them, and slid them into a fireproof box. I slept well that night. Not because I believed the storm had passed, but because I had built shelter. Let the next attack come. I was no longer barefoot in the rain. I had armor now. It was 2 days later when Miriam called and said what I already knew in my gut. "They've filed?" The words hung between us on the line like a silent bell still ringing. Jason and Emily had submitted a formal petition to the family court, an official request to have me declared mentally unfit to manage my own affairs, and to have Jason appointed as my legal guardian. In one stroke, they were attempting to erase my independence, my decisions, and if they could, my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even tremble. Because by then, I had learned something invaluable. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And this wasn't the first time. This was just the loudest. Miriam arrived at my house that evening with a file thick enough to flatten a bouquet. "We're going to dismantle every piece of it," she said calmly. "But you need to understand this is war now. Not a skirmish. They've weaponized the court system, which means we fight on paper. With strategy, not emotion." We sat at the dining table as she went through the petition line by line. The language was brutal, Jason claimed. I had exhibited signs of severe cognitive decline, had become paranoid, and was being influenced by manipulative outsiders. Emily's signed affidavit stated that I was uncharacteristically hostile, withholding support that had previously been consistent, and unable to manage basic financial tasks without confusion. They included statements from 3 witnesses. One was Emily herself. The second was a neighbor I barely knew, Mr. Harris, who once complained when my trash bins were left out past collection. The third was a pharmacist named Mr. Mistiel. Grady. I blinked at that one. "I don't even fill prescriptions regularly," I said. "How would he know anything about my state of mind?" "They're building a narrative," Miriam replied. "The truth doesn't matter to them. What matters is painting a picture vivid enough to influence a judge." We spent the next week preparing. I met with a forensic psychologist, Dr. Evans, who administered a full mental evaluation, cognitive tests, logic assessments, memory recall, reasoning simulations. At the end of our session, she looked up from her notes and smiled gently. "You're sharper than most of my clients in their 50s, she said. "There's no decline, no impairment, just clarity and maybe some hard-earned anger." I also met with Mr. Depuao Martinez, a financial analyst Miriam had recommended. He reviewed my spending, my account activity, my history of transactions. His report, printed on thick paper and signed at the bottom, concluded that my financial decisions were consistent, logical, and well documented. "There's nothing irrational about wanting to protect your assets from people who have a pattern of draining them," he said, almost like a benediction. The day before the court hearing, Miriam and I rehearsed my testimony. "They'll try to rattle you," she said. "They'll question your memory, your temperament, even your recent friendships. Don't defend. Just answer. Stay grounded in facts, not emotion." That night, I sat in bed and looked at the ceiling again, but not like before. This time, I wasn't paralyzed. I was bracing. The kind of stillness a soldier feels before the gate opens. I wasn't afraid of losing. I was afraid of what I might still be clinging to. Some small piece of hope that Jason might suddenly become the boy I once tucked in at night. The one who used to say I was his hero. But that boy was gone. Or maybe he had never truly been real. Maybe I had stitched him together out of need and memory. Tomorrow, I would bury that illusion. And I would do it on the record. The courthouse was tall and gray, with columns meant to inspire reverence. But to me they looked like silent witnesses. I walked in wearing a navy blazer and the brooch my husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. Not as armor, just as a reminder that once, I had been loved by someone who saw me as more than a provider. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jason stood in a new suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders. Emily wore black, like a widow at a funeral. Their lawyer, a man named Leonard Price, greeted them with a firm handshake and a folder of notes. None of them looked at me. Inside, the judge was solemn and surprisingly young, maybe early 50s. He introduced himself as Judge Kessler and made it clear from the beginning that he took elder guardianship cases very seriously. "We are not here to make assumptions," he said. "We are here to determine capacity and intent. Nothing more." Leonard Price began the proceedings by painting a picture, so warped I barely recognized the woman he described. According to him, I was volatile, unpredictable, surrounded by new influences, and unable to make coherent financial decisions. "The sudden cutoff in support," he said, "is a clear indicator of confusion or coercion." Then he called Emily to the stand. She wept. She talked about how much she loved me. She spoke of the concern she and Jason shared for my safety. "We only want to help her," she said. "But she's pushing everyone away. She's being manipulated." Miriam leaned over and whispered, "We let her talk. The more she talks, the more she exposes her true motive." Next, they called Jason. His voice shook, whether from nerves or performance. I couldn't tell. He spoke of my generosity in the past, and how recently something changed. He used phrases like emotional outbursts and refusing support, all while never mentioning the money explicitly. But the courtroom could feel it. It hung in every sentence like smoke. When it was our turn, Miriam stood and walked calmly to the center. "Your Honor," she began, "we are not here to debate emotion. We are here to demonstrate fact. And the facts are that my client has supported her son and daughter-in-law to the tune of over $40,000 in 3 years. And when she stopped when she protected herself, they claimed she was insane. She submitted every document, the evaluations, the financial analysis, the police report about their uninvited entry, the texts, even the wedding photos, where I was nowhere to be seen. Finally, it was my turn. I stood, walked slowly to the witness stand, and placed my hand on the Bible. The oath felt heavier than I expected. Not because I doubted my truth, but because I knew once I spoke it, I could never unspeak it. Miriam asked the questions gently. Giving me space to breathe, I spoke clearly, deliberately, about the years of giving, the quiet pattern of being needed but never truly seen. I described the moment they told me I wasn't invited to the wedding. I described the knock at my door, with the lawyer behind it. I described how it felt to have people I once loved try to rewrite my story in court. And when she asked me one final question, "Why did you cut off financial support?" I answered without flinching, because I finally realized they didn't love me. They loved what I gave them, and I stopped mistaking that for affection. The courtroom was silent. The opposing lawyer tried to shake me, but it didn't work. Every accusation he threw, I countered with facts. When he asked if I felt isolated, I said no, I had more meaningful relationships now than I'd had in years. When he asked if I felt confused, I said the only confusion was believing that generosity guaranteed loyalty. When I stepped down from the stand, I wasn't trembling. I was free. We waited nearly 2 hours for the judge to deliberate. I sat in the hallway beside Miriam, watching people pass in and out of other courtrooms, their lives suspended by decisions they couldn't control. But I was done being one of those people. Whatever happened in that courtroom, I had already taken back my power. That was mine, no matter the ruling. Jason sat across the hallway, scrolling on his phone like a teenager caught skipping class. Emily sat rigid beside him, arms crossed, her black dress wrinkled now, her composure less curated. She hadn't cried since her testimony. I imagined it was exhausting to keep up a performance for this long. Part of me still hoped just a flicker that Jason would look up, meet my eyes, and show a trace of regret. But he didn't. He didn't even glance my way. Finally, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Case 3118. Weston v. Weston. Parties please return. We filed back into the room, and the quiet was suffocating. Judge Kessler returned to the bench, with a file in hand and no expression on his face. My heart was steady, not fast. Not panicked. Just waiting. He adjusted his glasses and began to speak. I have reviewed the petition submitted by Mr. Rown and Mrs. Jason Weston, as well as all supporting documentation and testimony provided by both parties. He paused, looked down at his notes, then continued. Mrs. Monica Weston has presented clear and consistent evidence that she is fully capable of managing her financial affairs, making autonomous decisions, and understanding the nature and consequences of those decisions. The evaluations submitted by licensed professionals show no cognitive impairment, no signs of undue influence, and no cause for legal intervention. Miriam didn't move, but I could feel her satisfaction settle beside me like a warm coat. Judge Kessler kept going. In contrast, the petitioners have failed to provide medical evidence or substantive legal grounds for their request. Their case rests primarily on emotional dissatisfaction, perceived entitlement, and subjective observations that do not meet the legal standard for guardianship. He turned toward Jason and Emily, who were shrinking in their chairs now. This court finds that the petition for guardianship is not only unwarranted, but appears to be rooted in financial dependency and retaliatory behavior following Mrs. Weston's decision to discontinue monetary support. My hand went to my chest, not out of shock, but relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I was clear. And finally, the law saw it too. Judge Kessler delivered the final blow. This case is dismissed in full. No guardianship will be assigned. Further attempts to challenge Mrs. Weston's competency without new, compelling evidence will be considered harassment and may result in sanctions. This court stands adjourned. His gavel fell like thunder. Just once. But it echoed. I stood slowly. Jason didn't move. Emily turned to whisper something to him, but he pulled away. Their lawyer was already gathering his papers, already withdrawing from the battlefield. Miriam touched my elbow gently. You did it, she said. I nodded. But I didn't smile yet. I wanted to get outside. I needed air. As we left the courtroom, I looked back once, not for nostalgia, but to remember the shape of the place where I stopped being silent. Outside. The sky was that kind of early evening gold that makes everything look sharper. I took a deep breath, turned to Miriam, and asked, "What happens now?" She smiled. "Now. You live." But of course, it wasn't entirely over. That evening, as I sipped tea on my porch, I saw their car drive by. Slowly. Jason's. Not Emily's. He didn't stop. He didn't come to the door. But he circled the block twice. And that was enough to remind me. Just because you win the battle doesn't mean they won't try again. I texted Miriam immediately, who advised, "Start documenting. Every drive-by. Every message. Every missed call." I opened a fresh journal and wrote the date at the top. Day 1 after the trial. 5. 4:42 p.m. Jason drove past the house. Twice. No contact made. I would keep track. I wouldn't let vigilance steal my peace, but I wouldn't let peace make me naive. Later that night, Eleanor, the neighbor who had grown into my closest friend these past weeks, knocked on the door with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "You won," she said without preamble. "I saw it on your face before I even rang the bell." We sat in my living room with the windows open, the scent of lavender and late summer grass drifting in. She toasted me to the woman who refused to be erased. I laughed softly. To the woman who finally said no. We talked late into the night about aging, about letting go of illusions, about boundaries as an act of self-respect. Eleanor had stories of her own, battles with her grown daughter, and moments she wished she had said enough sooner. "But you did," I told her. "And I did too. That's all we can do." As she left, she hugged me tightly. "You're not alone, Monica," she said. "We all just think we are, until one of us says it out loud." That night, for the first time in months, I slept through the night. No phone calls. No texts. No voices telling me I was wrong for protecting myself. Just silence. And in that silence, something bloomed. Not just relief, but a sense of possibility. In the weeks that followed the trial, my life began to take on a new rhythm, quieter, slower, and more deliberate. Not empty. Just free. It's hard to explain to someone who's never lived under the invisible leash of obligation how disorienting freedom can feel at first. Like waking up in a house where the windows have just been opened for the first time in years. The air was unfamiliar, but it was clean. Each morning, I brewed my tea and checked the camera footage from the night before. Most days, nothing. Just a cat strolling past or a breeze moving through the trees. But every few days, Jason's car would pass by, slowly. Once in the morning, sometimes, again, at night. Never stopping. Never approaching. Just circling like a tethered balloon someone had let go but refused to admit they lost. Miriam told me to keep logging the activity. "Don't confront them," she said. "Don't speak. Don't wave. Just observe and record. We're building a file for a permanent restraining order." It sounded dramatic, legal, final. But strangely, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a natural progression, a way of saying, "You may have access to the road, but you no longer have access to me." On the 4th Thursday after the hearing, I received an official letter in the mail. Heavy envelope. Gold seal in the corner. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe some follow-up from the court. But it wasn't from the court. It was from the Office of Senior Advocacy and Legal Support. The letter informed me I had been nominated to speak at their annual seminar as a guest speaker on resilience, elder rights, and reclaiming agency. My name had been submitted, it said, by my attorney, Miriam Sloan, who had described my case as an exemplary story of courage, clarity, and boundary setting in the face of legal exploitation. I stared at the letter, unsure how to feel. Humbled. Grateful. Maybe just seen. There was a time I would have said no, that I wasn't the type to stand behind a podium, that my story was too personal, too painful, too messy to be shared with strangers in a room filled with bright lights and polite applause. But that was the old version of me. So I said yes. The weeks leading up to the event were filled with quiet moments of reflection. I pulled out old journals, highlighted dates and moments, stitched the timeline of my journey together with honest thread, not to justify myself, but to finally tell the story in my own voice. Without interruption or apology. The day of the event, I stood in front of a mirror and clipped on a simple pair of pearl earrings, ones I hadn't worn since my anniversary dinner 12 years ago. I wore a navy blue dress. Clean lines. Nothing extravagant. Just dignity in fabric form. The room was modest but full. Mostly women. Mostly older. Some with notepads. Some with husbands sitting stiffly beside them. Some with silence in their eyes that I recognized immediately, the kind of silence that forms when you've spent years biting back your truth. I stepped to the podium. And I began. I used to believe that love and sacrifice were the same thing. That, if I gave enough, stayed quiet enough, proved myself enough, I would be cherished. That if I kept saying yes even when I was tired, broke, or hurting, I was building something strong. But I wasn't. I was building a house with no walls for myself and too many doors for everyone else to walk through. The room didn't move. No one fidgeted. They were listening. Really listening. I wasn't declared incompetent. But I was declared invisible by my own son. And the day I stopped financing his comfort was the day he tried to erase my autonomy. Not because I was unwell, but because I finally said no. I told them everything. The trial. The lawyer at my dining table. The lies. The fake concern. The moment the judge returned my name to me, untarnished. And when I finished, I looked out and saw hands trembling. Some clutching tissues. Some reaching for the hands beside them. All of them saying the same thing without a word. Me too. Afterward, a line of women formed. They hugged me. They shared pieces of their stories. Some had already walked away from toxic children. Some were still learning how. Some cried into my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for saying it out loud." It was never about the speech. It was about the mirror. They saw themselves in me. Later that night, back home, I placed the thank you card from the event on my mantle. It was signed by every organizer. Each note handwritten. I stared at the card for a long time. And then I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I opened my laptop and booked a trip. Nothing fancy. Just a 5-day retreat in the mountains. No phone. No noise. No demands. Just me. 2 days before I was scheduled to leave, Jason tried again. This time, it wasn't a call or a drive-by. It was a handwritten letter. Folded neatly. Delivered without postage. Which meant had been by. The handwriting was familiar. The words weren't, "Mom, I know you hate us right now. I know you think we were trying to steal from you. But we were scared. We panicked. I was under pressure. Emily thought she was doing what was right. We made mistakes. But please, don't let this be the end. I miss you. I miss our life." There was no apology. No ownership. Just regret wrapped in justifications. I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it and placed it in a folder marked no response. Because not everything deserves a reply. That night, I sat on my porch, watched the stars come out, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because things were perfect, but because for once, they were mine. The morning of my trip, I woke up before the sun. Not from anxiety, but excitement. It had been years since I packed a suitcase for myself, not for a funeral, not to babysit, not to rush to someone else's emergency. Just me. My name on a reservation. A cabin in the woods. And 5 full days of silence that belonged only to me. I chose my clothes carefully, not out of vanity, but intention. The soft sweater I loved, but never wore because Emily said it made me look too much like a grandma. The walking shoes I'd kept in the closet for when I finally had time. And a journal I had bought 5 years ago and never written in because everything I did felt like a report to someone else. This time, it would be a letter to myself. The cab came at 7:30 sharp. The driver, a young woman with curly hair and a wide smile, loaded my bag into the trunk and asked where I was off to. I said, "Somewhere quiet." And she said, "Lucky you." Like she actually meant it. As the city slipped away behind us, I let the hum of the car lull me into a kind of stillness that felt both unfamiliar and holy. I wasn't thinking about Jason, or Emily, or the letter he had left without ringing the bell. I wasn't thinking about courtrooms or documents or missed calls. I was thinking about how pine trees always made me feel small in the right kind of way. How quiet wasn't something to be afraid of, it was something to be protected. The cabin was everything, the photos promised and more. Tucked in a clearing. Surrounded by tall evergreens. With a screened porch and a reading nook and a small kitchenette. I unpacked in silence. Set the tea on the counter. Lined up my books on the windowsill. And then I just stood there. Hands on my hips. Breathing in the stillness. No one to ask if I was okay. No one to need anything from me. Just me. And the breath. I forgot I'd been holding for years. Each day had a rhythm. Morning walks by the stream. Afternoon journaling. Evenings wrapped in a blanket with a book and a hot drink. No phone. No screens. No updates. Just the sound of wind through trees. Birds gossiping in branches. And the occasional rustle of a squirrel darting across the deck. And slowly, a question began to form, one I hadn't allowed myself to ask in a long time. What do I want now? Not what does someone else need? Not what will make me useful. But me, what brings me joy? I wrote that question at the top of a fresh journal page. And beneath it, answers began to bloom. Take a painting class. Call Diana and ask her to visit 9 team. Volunteer at the library. Join a walking group. Get a dog. I laughed when I wrote that last one. A dog. At 71. But the idea of it, of a companion who didn't lie, didn't take, didn't demand anything but affection and presence felt oddly perfect. The final night at the cabin, I made myself a full dinner. Roasted vegetables. A glass of wine. A small slice of cake I had bought from a bakery in town. I set the table for one with care. Even lit a candle. And I raised a toast not to closure. Not to revenge. But to return. The slow, steady return to myself, when I arrived home the next day. The house greeted me like an old friend who had waited patiently. The silence was still there, but now it was warm. Not sharp. I unpacked slowly, placing each item back where it belonged. And then I went to my desk and opened the folder marked no response. Jason's letter sat there, untouched, since I'd folded it shut. I didn't tear it up. I didn't answer it. I just added it to a second folder I had started. Closure. Because not all reconciliation looks like holding hands. Sometimes it looks like setting boundaries and never crossing them again. That afternoon, Eleanor stopped by with a potted herb from her garden lemon balm. For calming tea. She asked how the trip was. And I told her everything. She listened the way true friends do with both ears and no agenda. When she left, I sat on my porch and noticed a new car parked across the street. Unfamiliar. It stayed there for about 10 minutes. Then, it drove off. The camera caught the plate. I logged it. I wasn't afraid. That evening, I made myself a cup of lemon balm tea and wrote in my journal. I used to think protecting myself meant building a wall. Now I know it means building a home where I am safe. Even from the people I once loved the most. I slept soundly. And in the morning, I emailed the local shelter to ask about senior-friendly dog adoption. Because maybe it was time. Time to share peace, not pain. To offer love but not obligation. To live, not react. 2 weeks after returning from the mountains, I brought home a dog. A soft-eyed, caramel-colored mutt with slightly crooked ears and a tail that wagged like it had never known disappointment. Her name at the shelter was Muffin. But I looked at her once, saw the quiet strength in her gaze, and renamed her Ruth. Because she didn't need to be sweet. She needed to be strong. She was 10 years old. Gentle. House-trained. And slow to trust, which made two of us. The first night she slept at the foot of my bed, curled into a quiet coma. I felt something shift in the house. It wasn't just that I had company. It was that, for the first time in years, the presence in the house asked nothing from me except proximity. She didn't need saving. She just needed somewhere soft to land. During our morning walks, I noticed things I hadn't before. The crack in Mrs. Packenry's Ellison's sidewalk had finally been patched. The magnolia tree down the street had started blooming early this year. And the neighbor, 2 doors down, the one I used to wave to without knowing her name, stopped me and said, "You look lighter." And I was. Not because everything had been resolved, but because I had stopped trying to fix things that weren't mine to repair. Of course. The calls didn't stop. Jason tried again this time, with a voicemail that ran 3 minutes long. I didn't listen to it. The subject line on his follow-up email said simply, "We're still your family." But the body of the message, a new request. They had moved into a smaller apartment and needed help with the deposit. No apology. Just another ask. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then dragged the email to a new folder, ID created unanswered. It was different than no response. This one was for anything that no longer needed my attention. I didn't block his email. I didn't curse him. I didn't reply. Because peace, I had learned, doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from stillness. I closed the laptop, poured myself a second cup of tea, and turned my attention to Ruth, who had taken to watching birds from the window with a focus I admired. That weekend, I hosted Eleanor and 2 of her friends from her book club. All women over 65. All of them with stories like mine. One had a daughter who stopped speaking to her when she declined to fund her 3rd wedding. Another had a grandson who only visited when he needed a down payment for something. The third, she had cut off her son completely after he forged her signature on a loan application. We ate lemon cookies and drank iced tea with mint from Eleanor's garden. And somewhere between the laughter and the shared glances of recognition, I realized I had found something I hadn't even known I was missing. Community. Not one built around obligation, but one built around clarity. Boundaries. Grace. That night, I sat in the backyard under the soft glow of string lights Jason had installed years ago, back when he still wanted to impress me. Some of the bulbs had gone out. I made a mental note to replace them. Not because I wanted to preserve the memory, but because they were mine now. My lights. My space. My life. The stars were out in full, and Ruth was curled on the grass beside my chair. I found myself whispering, Not to anyone in particular, but to the version of me who had once stood trembling in her own hallway, holding a phone that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "You made it," I said softly. "You really made it." And I meant it. Not because I had won a courtroom battle, but because I had stopped waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself. And in doing so, I had stepped into a life that no longer required constant explanation or apology. Only presence. Only truth. The summer passed in a rhythm that felt almost sacred: slow mornings with Ruth, afternoons spent volunteering at the library, and quiet evenings on the porch, with a book in hand and nothing tugging at my time. For the first time in decades, my life was not measured by how much I could give, but by how fully I could be present with myself. And it was enough. More than enough. One Thursday morning, I received a letter in the mail with a familiar return address. Jason and Emily Weston. I stood in the hallway for a moment, envelope in hand, debating whether to even open it. Part of me wanted to toss it into the fireplace without a glance, but another part, the wiser part, knew it wasn't about them. It was about me. I needed to know if the pattern had changed, or if it had simply evolved. I opened it carefully, like peeling back a wound that had already scarred. The letter was longer than I expected. 2 full pages. Handwritten. Jason's handwriting. Neat. As always. He didn't start with "Dear Mom." He started with "Monica." That told me everything. The letter was filled with the kind of vague regrets that sound like apologies, but aren't. He acknowledged that things had gotten out of hand, that they had been under a lot of pressure, that Emily's suggestion to pursue legal action came from a place of fear, not greed. He never once said we were wrong. He never once said, "I am sorry." And at the bottom of the second page, the real reason appeared: we're considering moving out of state. Emily has family in Nevada, but before we go, we were wondering if you'd reconsider helping with some final expenses, just to get us back on our feet. I know things between us are complicated, but I also know you're still the kind of person who doesn't leave people behind. I folded the letter slowly. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. I felt done. Not the bitter kind of done. The peaceful kind. Like a puzzle finally solved. They hadn't changed, but I had. I slipped the letter into the unanswered folder, and then I made myself a pot of jasmine tea. As I poured the steaming water over the leaves, I said out loud, "I am not the person you write to when you're out of options. I am the person you lost when you chose to see love as leverage." That afternoon, I visited my husband's grave. I hadn't been back in almost a year since before all of this began. The headstone was clean, but I brought fresh flowers anyway, blue hydrangeas. His favorite I sat beside the stone and spoke the way I always had with him, honest. Unfiltered. Quiet, but certain. "I think you'd be proud of me," I said. Not because I fought, but because I stopped begging to be seen. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I felt him. Not in a ghostly way. In the way a memory softens into presence. He would have been furious at what Jason and Emily did, but he also would have reminded me, you can't make someone love you the way you deserve, but you can stop handing them the tools to keep hurting you. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my journal and made a new list, not of what I had lost, but of what I had gained. 1. Boundaries without guilt. 2. Peace without apology. 3. A dog who reminds me joy can be quiet. 4. Friends who understand without needing the whole story. 5. The ability to say no and mean it. The list went on. At the bottom, I added one last item in bold. 6. A life I no longer have to earn. That night, as I was brushing my teeth, the doorbell rang. My heart didn't leap. I didn't freeze. I simply walked to the monitor and checked the camera. It was Emily. Alone. No car parked nearby. No suitcase. Just her standing on the porch, arms folded, eyes scanning the door as if expecting it to open. I didn't move. She stood there for nearly 5 minutes, and then she pulled a small envelope from her purse, slid it through the mail slot, and walked away. I waited until I was sure she was gone. Then I picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper. No greeting. No closing. Just one sentence. You'll regret pushing us away. I stared at the words and felt nothing. Because I already knew the truth. The only thing I regretted was letting it take this long. I added the note to the evidence log Miriam and I had kept, and then I poured a glass of Trapper water, gave Ruth a scratch behind the ears, and sat back down in my chair. I had built a world without begging, without fear, and no envelope in the world could take that from me. The morning after Emily's visit, I didn't wake up afraid. I didn't check the windows for signs of another ambush, or scroll through messages looking for landmines. Instead, I did something simple, something quiet, something free. I opened all the windows. Not just the ones in the living room. All of them. Bedroom, kitchen, hallway. I let the fresh air roll in. Let the curtains lift gently in the morning, breeze like sails on a boat. I was finally steering again. The house smelled like lemon soap and blooming basil. My house. My air. My peace. Later that morning, I called Miriam and read her the sentence Emily had left me. You'll regret pushing us away. Miriam didn't laugh. She didn't react with outrage either. She just said, "And do you?" I looked around the room, the sun on the hardwood floors, the photo of Ruth lying curled by the door, to the stack of letters I no longer responded to, the silence that no longer echoed. No. I said. Not even a little. Miriam sighed. The way someone does when they know the battle is over, but the aftermath still lingers. Well, add it to the file, she said. But I don't think they'll try anything else. And they didn't. Because Emily's threat wasn't a plan. It was a tantrum. A final attempt to shame me back into submission. But shame only works when you still believe you've done something wrong. And I didn't believe that anymore. That same week, Eleanor and I attended a community event hosted by the Senior Women's Advocacy Alliance. We were invited to share our stories, not as victims, but as voices. Not as cautionary tales, but as women who chose to stop living under someone else's script. There were 10 of us on stage. 10 stories. 10 different paths that led to the same destination. Freedom. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from a paper. I didn't list facts. I told them about the lilac dress that never got worn. About the phone calls that stopped feeling like love. About the moment in the courtroom when the judge didn't just dismiss a case, he gave me back my name. And then I said the words that had carried me every day since. They wanted my money. They wanted my silence. But what they lost was me. When I stepped down, I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I had said it out loud. Not just for them. For me. 1 month later, I sold the house. It was a decision I'd been circling for years, but never had the clarity or courage to make blank. Not because I didn't love it. I did. but because every room carried echoes. Some beautiful, some bruising. And I no longer needed to live inside a museum of my own history. I moved into a sunlit apartment near the city center, 2 bedrooms, a balcony, and a kitchen just big enough to cook for 1. Or maybe 2, if I ever invited someone in. Ruth adjusted faster than I expected. She found her favorite spot by the window within the first hour. I bought her a new bed, though she still preferred the rug. She had never needed much. Just consistency. Something we now gave each other. Every single day. I hung new pictures on the walls. Not of Jason, not of Emily, but of landscapes I'd taken during my trip to the mountains. Of Eleanor and me laughing at the farmer's market. Of Ruth, with her ears flopped over, eyes half closed in the sun. One evening, I opened a letter from Diana, my sister. She had heard everything. From the trial, to the speech, to the move. Inside the envelope, Shed tucked a note and a photograph. It was from when we were children, standing outside our childhood home. Arms linked. Both wearing sun hats too big for our heads. "You were always the strong one," she wrote. "You just needed a reason to remember." I framed it. Put it on my dresser. A week later, I joined a painting class at the local arts center. I had told myself for years that it was too late to start something new. That hobbies were for people with time and space. But now I had both. I painted a lemon tree. The instructor said the colors were bold. That the way I used yellow was unexpected. I laughed. I've been unexpected a lot lately. And I liked it that way. The last time I saw Jason was 6 months after the trial. I was walking out of the co-op with a bag of fresh bread and rosemary. He was coming in. Alone. We both stopped. He looked thinner. Tired. Older, in the way people look when their plans no longer work. He didn't speak. Neither did I. We stood there for maybe 5 seconds. And then I stepped aside. And he walked past me. No confrontation. No apology. No scene. Just distance. And that, too, was a kind of closure. Because I no longer needed him to say anything in order for me to feel complete. He didn't choose me. So, I chose myself. And I've been choosing myself ever since. Now, every evening around 6, I sit on my balcony with Ruth curled at my feet. A cup of tea in one hand. And a journal in the other. I don't write about regrets. I write about recipes I want to try. Places I want to visit. People I want to meet. Stories I want to tell. Because this isn't the end. It's the beginning. A life not shaped by guilt. Or duty. Or desperation. A life shaped by presence. Joy. And softness that doesn't apologize for existing. I don't wait for the phone to ring anymore. I don't check the mail with dread. I don't wonder if I made the right choice. I know I did, and I hope that wherever Jason and Emily are now, they've learned something too. Not about winning, but about worth. You don't inherit love. You earn it. And if you spend all your time counting on someone's money, you might just miss the most valuable thing they ever had to offer. Their heart. My name is Monica Weston. And I am no longer for sale.